Since 2001, the Brooklyn/New Jersey Nets have accumulated the 10th most playoff wins in the NBA. Maybe that isn't the highest bar to clear, but being in the top third of NBA franchises in terms of postseason success is an accomplishment of some kind. Along the way, a through line for different Nets eras is that they've always been an organization willing to make a move. Like, a big move. I mean, if you've ever been thirsty for blockbuster trades, brother, have I got a franchise for you. Now, as we'll discuss in this video, there has always been an insane variance in success levels for these big moves made by the Nets. I mean, we're talking both franchise empowering and franchise crippling trades made, all within the last 2 decades. It's no secret that the current edition of the Nets has fallen under a scrutinous microscope after back-to-back playoff failures. Which is why today I decided we'd examine just how the Nets mortgaged their entire future to open a championship window, only to come up a bit short. Again.
The San Antonio Spurs are your world champions.
June 15th, 2003. The New Jersey Nets, for the second year in a row, find themselves walking off the court at the NBA Finals empty-handed. In 2002, a plucky Nets crew was struck down by Shaq, Kobe, and the three-peat Lakers, while in 2003 it was Tim Duncan and the San Antonio Spurs doing the deed. Led by perennial All-NBAer and MVP candidate Jason Kidd, the Nets were able to capitalize on a weak stretch in the Eastern Conference to appear in the Big Dance 2 seasons in a row. Despite the relatively strong playoff success in the ensuing 19 years since that moment in 2003, the Nets have failed to make another finals appearance, although not for a lack of trying. See, after a failed season in 03-04, the Nets would make a giant splash during the 04-05 season, acquiring in a lopsided trade a disgruntled star player who was forcing his way out of his current situation. In this case, one Vince Carter. Just gonna copy and paste that wording for later in the video though, don't mind me. The Nets would fleece the Raptors in the trade, as all Vince cost them was an aging Alonzo Mourning, Eric and Aaron Williams, plus a couple ultimately unsuccessful draft picks. The newfound talented trio of Carter, Jason Kidd, and Richard Jefferson would flash time and again over the next 3 seasons, but were never able to get over the hump. A pair of second-round exits would be their ceiling, and by 2008, the Nets were ready to shift gears. The 07-08 season would see New Jersey miss the playoffs for the first time in 6 years. The Jason Kidd era would officially be closed mid-season, as the now unhappy longtime leader of the franchise was shipped off to Dallas. The trade was actually a reasonable one in terms of rebuilding, as the Nets would acquire a package including promising 24-year-old point guard Devin Harris, $3 million in cash, and 2 first-round picks. Using their own lottery pick in 2008, the Nets would select a franchise cornerstone in Brook Lopez. As well, they scooped Ryan Anderson late with one of the Mavs acquired picks. Richard Jefferson was traded to Milwaukee, meaning it was Vince and a young crew moving forward for New Jersey. That group was ultimately unsuccessful, as the Nets began a fairly quick bottoming out process in 08-09. They'd finished 34-48 for the second straight season. Vince was beginning to slow down individually, but Devin Harris was named an All-Star and Brook Lopez finished 3rd in Rookie of the Year voting. Hey, I mean, those are all positive building blocks. Right, guys? The Nets would move off the now 33-year-old Carter in a move which saw them send Vince along with Ryan Anderson to Orlando in exchange for Rafer Alston, Courtney Lee, and Tony Battie? Okay, they kinda got fleeced there, but we move on. Despite the positives I referenced moments ago, the 09-10 season would be an all-time low for the New Jersey Nets franchise, as they'd sport a record of 12-70, the 6th worst record in NBA history. They'd burned through 3 different coaches during the season, and to compound things, they would actually fall in the draft lottery, missing out on the chance to draft John Wall and settling for Derek Favors at number 3 overall. Ouch. Summer of 2010 was also a transition period for the franchise, as Avery Johnson was hired as head coach, and former 76ers boss Billy King was handed the reins as new general manager. After striking out on LeBron, Wade, and Bosh in free agency, the Nets would enter the 2010-11 season with more or less the same roster intact. They'd improve and finish 24-58 under Avery Johnson. As soon as this decade hit though, it became an endless cycle of the Nets being linked to every single star player that was rumored to be on the move. Every single one. This began in 2011, as Carmelo Anthony was consistently in the news with the belief he'd be traded by the Denver Nuggets. At one point, the Nets actually neared a done deal for the Brooklyn-born star forward, a 3-team deal that would have seen Melo, Chauncey Billups, and Rip Hamilton all end up on the Nets. I should also cut into the video here to say that just prior to the 10-11 season, Russian oligarch Mikhail Prokhorov purchased an 80% stake in the Nets, meaning he was now the big boss. Presumably under the influence of his big boss, new GM Billy King wasn't leaving the 2011 trade deadline empty-handed. After the crosstown Knicks paid a king's ransom for Melo, the Nets would in turn make a blockbuster of their own, acquiring multi-time All-Star Darren Williams from the Utah Jazz. The deal saw the Nets surrender 2 of their 3 primary young assets in Derek Favors and Devin Harris, in addition to a pair of first-round picks. Additionally, as you can see in the report, the Nets made a separate, seemingly unimportant deal to maneuver the cap, sending an expiring contract and a second-round pick to the Warriors. That pick, though, would turn into Draymond Green. Yep. Okay, but that note notwithstanding, the D-Will trade was actually not that bad. He was 26 at the time, certainly worthy of giving up 1 first-round pick for sure. Plus, you know, Devin Harris, Derek Favors, neither of those players developed into anything too special. But everything that happened after the Darren Williams trade, well, it was an unequivocal nightmare for the Nets. The lockout-shortened 11-12 season would see New Jersey finish 22-44, missing the playoffs by a healthy margin. During the season, another superstar, this time Dwight Howard, was linked directly to the Nets. Dwight was upset with his lot in life in Orlando and was rumored to have requested a trade directly to New Jersey, with a proposed deal on the table in exchange for Brook Lopez and 2 first-rounders. The ever-enigmatic Howard, though, would eventually waive his right to opt out from the Magic, committing to 1 more season in Orlando, killing a potential trade. Once again, though, Prokhorov and Billy King weren't content, as they instead made a, quote, harmless deal to acquire Gerald Wallace from Portland in exchange for a pair of players and their upcoming first-round pick. Yeah, F them picks. Again, the Darren Williams acquisition wasn't all that bad in a vacuum, but the Nets made it their mission to ensure he was happy no matter what the cost, which got them into trouble. Because although the pick sent to Portland was top 3 protected, the Nets had the 6th worst record in the NBA at the time of the trade, all but ensuring they'd lose it. Even worse, Billy King was aware of the implications of the trade, saying, quote, "At this point, we're trying to speed the process up a bit and start winning more." Like I said, F them picks. Courtesy the Nets, Portland would end up with the 6th pick in the 2012 NBA draft, selecting Damian Lillard out of Weber State. Prior to the 2012-13 season, the Nets would officially move into Barclays Center and become the Brooklyn Nets. In a complete deja vu situation, Dwight Howard would once again request a trade from the Orlando Magic during the offseason, once again with the hopes he'd end up on the Nets. This time around, the proposed deal would have seen Brook Lopez and 4 first-round picks heading to the Magic, but Orlando actually said no. As was their MO at this point, the Nets, after striking out with 1 big fish, dropped the line for a different one. This time they'd land 6-time All-Star Joe Johnson in a trade from Atlanta, in exchange for a slew of expiring contracts, Deshaun Stevenson, and a lottery-protected first-rounder. Not a horrible maneuver for the star-thirsty Nets. The busy summer continued, with Darren Williams re-upping on a massive 5-year extension, citing the Johnson acquisition as the reason for his return to Brooklyn. In addition to D-Will and ISO Joe, the Nets had locked up Brook Lopez long-term and further solidified their core by extending Gerald Wallace 4 more years. Anyways, the 12-13 season for the new-look Nets was genuinely successful. They'd go 49-33 with PJ Carlesimo taking over for Avery Johnson mid-season. Each of Williams, Johnson, and Lopez would eclipse 15 points a game, but playoff disappointment, as the Nets would fall in 7 games to the Derrick Rose-less Chicago Bulls. That is tough, but I mean, the Nets had assembled a pretty nice competitive core, so no need to do anything too crazy. Right, guys?
That you are so not. Oh, God. Balls.
Just a week after he retired as a player, the Nets announced that Jason Kidd would be hired on as head coach. Shortly thereafter, Brooklyn would push all their chips in, mortgaging their entire future in a truly haunting blockbuster trade with Boston. The trade saw Brooklyn acquire Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Jason Terry in exchange for Gerald Wallace, a slew of veterans, and 3 first-round picks plus another pick swap, With the additions of Pierce, Garnett, and Terry, as well extraneous signings of Andre Kirilenko and Sean Livingston, the Nets were officially dubbed accurately a super team. Interestingly, the reaction to the trade from the NBA world was initially skewed in favor of the Nets by like a lot. Obviously, with hindsight, I think we can all agree that trade was absolutely terrible for the Nets, maybe the worst trade in NBA history. For reference, the 4 picks that would end up in Boston's hands, including the pick swap, would result in the Celtics completely molding the core for the current era of their franchise. I mean, it's honestly nuts. Now, in theory, you actually could view this trade with hindsight and suggest it doesn't matter, since both the Celtics and the Nets have failed to win a championship since, and they now find themselves in a pretty similar spot in 2022. But as I'll outline, this trade devastated the Nets. I mean, it leveled them. I'm talking, it took years for them to recover. Brooklyn would go 44-38 in 2013-14 with that new look roster. Garnett, Terry, and Brook Lopez struggled to stay on the court, while the highlight of the season was undoubtedly the Nets sweeping their regular season series against Miami. The Heat, though, would swiftly get revenge, beating Brooklyn in 5 games in the second round of the playoffs. Those who supported the trade because it opened up a championship window for the Nets were surely walking those takes back with the quickness, as during the summer of 2014, Paul Pierce would sign as a UFA with Washington. The Nets declined to incur a sizable luxury tax penalty in order to keep him. No, wait, I'm sorry. I cannot let this go, okay? The Nets sold their soul to build this ancient championship contending core, only for it to result in 1 second round exit. They didn't even have the foresight to carve out cap space to make a second run of it. They just let Paul Pierce walk. Unreal. Jason Kidd was also out after just a season, moving to Milwaukee in a rarely seen coach trade. Under Lionel Hollins, the Nets would slip into the playoffs after going 38-44 in the 14-15 season, only to lose in 6 games to Atlanta in round 1. After years of bending over backwards to ensure his happiness, the Nets would waive Darren Williams following the disappointing season. Jason Terry had already been moved, while in possibly the only W of Billy King's tenure in Brooklyn, Kevin Garnett had also been traded, straight up to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Thaddeus Young. And just like that, the fabled 2013 blockbuster trade was wrapped up. For Brooklyn, but Boston wasn't close to finish benefiting from it just yet. The Billy King era for the Nets would mercifully come to a close in January 2016. As the Nets were on their way to a dismal 21-61 finish, Sean Marks would be hired on as GM, inheriting a truly disastrous mess. One of the final remnants of the Nets super team, Joe Johnson, was waived during the season. In an open letter written to fans, Mikhail Prokhorov would apologize for the previous direction of the team, saying, quote, "We had been told that you can't buy a championship. Truer words were never spoken." Armed with essentially no draft capital, Sean Marks would begin the process of rebuilding the entire Nets franchise in 2016. Under new head coach Kenny Atkinson, a roster led by Brook Lopez and Bojan Bogdanovic, along with the likes of Trevor Booker, Randy Foye, and Jeremy Lin, would finish an NBA worst 20-62 in 2016-17. As Brooklyn had plunged to the bottom of the trash heap in the NBA, it feels an appropriate time to check in on the Boston Celtics. They'd selected Jaylen Brown 3rd overall in 16, using the 2nd pick acquired in the Pierce KG trade. They had made the conference finals in 17, and would collect the 1st overall pick ahead of the 2017 draft thanks to the pick swap from the Pierce KG trade. Boston would trade down and select Jason Tatum 3rd overall. My word, that trade. The Nets did manage to spin some positive from that draft, however, as they'd move Brook Lopez and his expiring contract, along with the 27th overall pick, to the Lakers in exchange for D'Angelo Russell and Timofey Mozgov's albatross deal. This move gave the Nets a legitimate building block in the 21-year-old Russell, as well would prove to be a forward-thinking move in terms of asset management. Brooklyn saw slight improvement in 2017-18, finishing 28-54 on the season, but critically showed signs of life in terms of organizational development. A number of names key to the future of the Nets would appear during this season. Karis LeVert, whose draft rights had been acquired from Indiana in a trade for Thaddeus Young, averaged 12 points a game off the bench. Okay, fine. Some good did come from Kevin Garnett as a net, I suppose. Spencer Dinwiddie had been signed out of the G League in 2016 after being waived by Chicago. He started 58 games. Joe Harris had seen his career resurrected after flaming out in Cleveland. As Brooklyn also signed him from the G League in 16, Harris would average 11 points a game on over 40% from 3. And finally, Jarrett Allen averaged a modest just 8-5 during his rookie season. He'd been drafted 22nd overall by the Nets in 2017, using a pick that had been acquired for Bojan Bogdanovic at the trade deadline months earlier. To be honest, in the darkest days of the Nets franchise post-Celtics blockbuster, Sean Marks was putting on a low-key rebuilding masterclass. A continuation of that was after years and years of dancing around the move, the Nets would finally acquire Dwight Howard in the summer of 2018. No, seriously, I have no recollection of this, but Brooklyn shipped out Mozgov's Albatross with a pair of second rounders to Charlotte for Howard. This was a continuation of the wise asset management I mentioned earlier, as the Nets would immediately buy out Howard. In buying out the former star, Brooklyn was on track to have an estimated $60 million in cap space come 2019. We should also take one last little look-see at the Boston Celtics here, as at the 2018 draft, the Cleveland Cavaliers would select Colin Sexton 8th overall. The Cavs had acquired that pick 1 year prior from the Celtics in exchange for Kyrie Irving. And mercifully, the 2013 blockbuster was in the past for both sides of the trades. Except for, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown still being on the Celtics in this current day and age, but I digress. The 2018-19 Nets would go 42-40 under Kenny Atkinson, having completely shifted from the failed super team era to being a lovable, scrappy young core. D'Angelo Russell led the way for the Nets and was named an all-star in the process, while each of the core pieces I outlined earlier played a role in pushing Brooklyn back to the playoffs for the first time since 2014. Brooklyn would lose round 1 to Joel Embiid and the 76ers, but everyone had their eye on the summer of 2019 regardless of that outcome. See, summer 19 was a truly gigantic offseason for the Nets, and as I'll explain, that even with hindsight, it was an overwhelmingly positive inflection point for the franchise. Former league MVP and two-time Finals MVP Kevin Durant would sign with the Nets as a UFA, following a bit of a rocky end to his tenure in Golden State. The Nets did have to surrender D'Angelo Russell in a sign-and trade with the Warriors in order to make the acquisition feasible, but certainly a fair price to pay for a player of KD's stature. It was a slight gamble, however, in that Durant was fresh off tearing his Achilles in the 2019 Finals and was set to miss the entire 19-20 season. A positive effect of acquiring Durant, though, was that the Nets were also able to sign six-time All-Star Kyrie Irving as a free agent. Durant and Irving had plotted together to sign with either of the New York-based franchises before ultimately deciding on Brooklyn. This was also a full-circle closure moment for the Nets franchise. As I outlined earlier, the final pick from the 2013 blockbuster was traded by Boston for Kyrie back in 2017. After 2 unsuccessful seasons in Boston, Irving would now sign with Brooklyn. So it's almost like the Nets just traded for Kyrie Irving straight up, and all it cost them was a first-round pick. Well, that and $150 million, a few years of just horrible play for the franchise, but other than that, an absolute bargain. Kyrie would open the 2019-20 season with a sizzling 50-point effort, but he'd struggled to stay on the court in his first season with Brooklyn, suiting up in just 20 total games. The Nets would go 35-37 on the season, slipping into the playoffs in the bubble even without Durant or Irving, only to get swept by the Raptors. In a truly surprising move, the Nets would hire Steve Nash to replace Kenny Atkinson as head coach. This was a move that, in my opinion, harkened back to the days of the franchise trying to please Darren Williams, as Nash had no coaching experience and was pretty transparently hired in an effort to please Durant and Irving this time. After a slew of minor offseason moves, the Nets would enter the 2021 season with 2 healthy superstars and a strong supporting cast consisting of Spencer Dinwiddie, Landry Shamet, Bruce Brown, Joe Harris, Karis LeVert, Jeff Green, Jarrett Allen, and Nick Claxton. Unsurprisingly, Brooklyn was the 3rd strongest favorite to win the title entering the season. After starting the season with a middling 7-6 record, the Brooklyn Nets would once again mortgage their future in order to solidify their shot at an NBA championship. The Nets would acquire former league MVP and perennial All-Star James Harden from the Houston Rockets in yet another massive blockbuster trade. Harden had all but quit on the Rockets, forcing them to deal him, and his preferred destination was the Nets. The final trade would be a huge 4-team deal also involving the Pacers and Cavaliers, which resulted in the Nets receiving James Harden and a 2nd-round pick, while giving up a slew of players including Jarrett Allen and Karis LeVert, in addition to 3 first-round picks and 4 pick swaps. swaps. TLDR, Houston took control of Brooklyn's drafts through 2027. This bet was certainly a more calculated one than the Celtics blockbuster, as the floor with 3 stars ranging in ages from 28 to 32 is much higher than the floor of the Pierce-Garnett combination, so the draft capital Brooklyn moved out this time, while substantial, was less likely to be quite as impactful, as the Nets should be pretty good, right? But in addition to the picks, surrendering some legitimate, homegrown, young depth pieces, I mean, that would hurt the Nets. It certainly would. Now, Harden was terrific upon being acquired by Brooklyn, playing so well as to generate light MVP buzz for his play. Kyrie was ironically the most consistent piece for the Nets, playing in 54 games, making All-NBA third team for his exploits. Brooklyn would add former All-Stars LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin off the buyout market, with the former eventually retiring, but the latter becoming a valuable role player for the group. The 21 Brooklyn Nets have truly become one of the most fascinating what-if scenarios in recent NBA history. After playing just 202 total minutes together in the regular season, the Durant, Harden, Irving trio was healthy come playoff time and would dominate the Celtics in round 1. Unfortunately though, both Harden and Kyrie would be felled by injury in round 2, with only the former returning to the lineup in compromised fashion. Kevin Durant would heroically lift his team to overtime of Game 7, eventually falling just short. I actually made a video including this Brooklyn Nets what if with a bit more detail. It's on my channel, you should go watch it. Expectations were once again sky high for the Nets ahead of the 21-22 season, but those expectations were joined quickly by extreme drama. Prior to the season, it was confirmed that Kyrie Irving was not vaccinated, meaning he would be unable to play in home games due to New York City regulations. The Nets as an organization took a proud, hardline stance against the idea Irving could be a part-time player, saying he wouldn't join the team until he was able to fully participate. 2 months later, after injuries began to stack for the Nets, they would walk that statement back completely, welcoming in Kyrie Irving as a part-time player. I honestly still can't believe that timeline of events. With their big 3 finally all healthy and on the court together, the Nets would make a statement in January, beating the top-seeded Chicago Bulls with relative ease. James Harden, meanwhile, hadn't signed a contract extension earlier in the season prior to the deadline. At the time, he personally dismissed any concerns about his future being in Brooklyn. Once again, though, we flash forward a few months, where in late January, reports surfaced that James Harden was once again interested in moving on in his career to explore other opportunities. That report detailed how Harden was frustrated with Kyrie Irving's part-time player status and how he ended up having to shoulder too heavy a load for the team. Harden also wasn't a huge fan of Steve Nash and didn't love living in New York because of the weather, or maybe it was, you know, money reasons. For the second time in 1 calendar year, Harden was able to successfully disgruntle his way out of a situation, as the Nets would deal the star player to Philadelphia. In exchange, the Nets would receive Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, what promises to be a late first-round pick in 22, as well a future 2027 first-rounder. Ironically, if there was one player more discontent with their situation than James Harden, it was Ben Simmons, you know, the player Brooklyn was acquiring as the centerpiece of the deal. Simmons had wanted out of Philly after a disastrous playoff run a season prior, initially refused to report to 76ers camp, and according to his agency Clutch Sports, was mistreated as a whole by the Philadelphia organization. I didn't make this video to litigate the whole Ben Simmons situation. I mean, we all know the story by now, so let's move on. We also all know the story of how the Nets season would play out post-Harden. A play-in victory over Cleveland salvaged a playoff spot for Irving, Durant and company, but once there, it was a bloodbath, as the Celtics would handle business in an emphatic sweep. Simmons has yet to appear in a game for the Brooklyn Nets and represents a question mark to trump all question marks in the NBA moving forward. The Nets were able to recoup some draft picks from Philadelphia in the James Harden move, but Houston still controls their draft through 2027. Kevin Durant did sign an extension to remain with the Nets, which is good, but at age 33, he did start to show some cracks this postseason. I already mentioned the uncertainty around Ben Simmons, but what about Kyrie Irving? He's armed with a player option this summer, and as we know, he is one of the most unpredictable personalities in the entire NBA. Could the Nets simply retool around Durant and Irving, get Ben Simmons on the court, and possibly compete for a championship in 2023? I mean, absolutely, I could see it happening. But could this precarious and delicate situation backfire on Brooklyn, leaving them deprived of assets for another extended period of time? Well, I mean, no comment.